I'm writing this down because I don't want to be the only one who remembers it. For a long time, I convinced myself that what happened to me was the result of exhaustion, stress, or isolation. That's easy to do when no one else was there to see it. Easy to dismiss when the place itself no longer exists in the way I remember it. But there are details I can't explain away. Details that haven't faded with time. If anything, they've grown sharper. I was 34 years old when this happened, working seasonal jobs that paid well but kept me isolated. I didn't mind being alone. In fact, I preferred it. After years of shared apartments, noisy streets, and constant obligations, solitude felt like a luxury. That's how I ended up agreeing to stay at the house. It was described to me as a temporary caretaking assignment. The owners lived out of state and needed someone to occupy the place during the winter months to prevent vandalism, frozen pipes, and squatters. The pay was good. The requirements were minimal. Stay inside, keep the heat on, report anything unusual. The house sat well outside the nearest town, at the end of a narrow road that stopped abruptly at a tree line. Past the backyard fence, there was nothing but forest. Thick, uneven woodland that climbed uphill and disappeared into shadow even during the day. No neighbors, no foot traffic, no reason for anyone to pass by. I arrived in early January, just after a heavy snowfall. The driveway had been plowed recently, which struck me as odd given how remote the place was. Fresh tire tracks led up to the garage, then stopped. Inside, the house was warm. That was the first thing I noticed. Not just heated, but comfortably warm, like someone had adjusted the thermostat recently. The air didn't smell stale. There was no dust on the furniture. A lamp glowed softly in the living room, left on. Someone had been there. The caretaker before me, according to the company, had left weeks earlier. The owners were states away. I brushed the thought aside and unloaded my things. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, kitchen, bathroom, and a small bedroom downstairs. 2 more bedrooms and a narrow hallway upstairs. All of it felt older than it looked, as if the walls had absorbed decades of sound and memory. That first night was uneventful. Wind moved through the trees behind the house, producing a steady, whispering noise that almost sounded like distant conversation if you didn't listen too closely. I slept on the couch, television on low, drifting in and out of shallow sleep. The second night was when I first noticed the footsteps. They came from upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps moving from one end of the hallway to the other. Not pacing, not rushing. Just walking, as if someone were inspecting the space. I sat up and listened. The steps stopped. I waited for the sound of a door opening or closing, but it never came. After a few moments, the steps resumed, retracing the same path back the way they'd come. I told myself it was the house settling. Old structures make noise, especially in winter. Wood contracts, pipes shift, sound travels differently at night. Still, I slept with the lights on. By the 4th night, the footsteps had a rhythm. They always began between 2 and 3 in the morning, always upstairs, always followed the same path along the hallway. They never entered a room. They never approached the stairs. They just walked. And the 5th night, I heard something else. A soft, dragging sound. It came from the kitchen. I lay frozen on the couch, listening as the noise repeated. Wood scraping lightly against wood. A chair being pulled back from the table, inch by inch. Then silence. Then breathing. It wasn't loud. It wasn't labored. It was calm and steady, like someone standing still and listening. I held my breath, afraid that even the sound of it might give me away. A voice spoke from the darkness. "You're awake earlier than usual."
It took me a moment to realize why the words unsettled me so deeply. The voice was mine. Not similar, not close. Exactly mine.
After that night, I stopped pretending I could explain things away. I didn't sleep, not really. I drifted in shallow, anxious half-states where every sound felt amplified and every shadow seemed to stretch too far. I kept the lights on constantly, telling myself it was temporary, that I'd finish the assignment and leave. But the house didn't feel temporary anymore. During the day, it behaved like an ordinary place. Sunlight filtered through the windows. The forest beyond the backyard looked peaceful, almost inviting. Birds returned. Wind moved the branches. If I hadn't known better, I could have convinced myself the nights were imagined. Except the house remembered. On the morning after the voice spoke, I found signs of activity I couldn't deny. The kitchen table was no longer in its usual position. It had been turned slightly, angled toward the hallway. A chair sat pulled out, facing the stairs. On the counter was a notebook I hadn't brought with me. Inside were pages filled with handwriting. My handwriting. Daily notes, observations, comments about the house, the weather, the quiet. They matched my thoughts exactly. Things I remembered thinking but never writing down. The last entry ended mid-sentence. You're getting better at pretending not to notice. I packed a bag that morning. I told myself I'd leave as soon as I finished one last inspection of the house. I needed closure. I needed to prove to myself there wasn't something wrong with me. That was another mistake. The upstairs hallway felt different in daylight. Narrower, longer. The walls seemed closer together, as if the space had subtly shifted. I opened each bedroom door carefully. The first room was empty. The second was empty too, except for the closet. Inside hung a coat identical to the one I was wearing. Same wear patterns, same tear near the cuff, same smell. I didn't remember hanging it there. That night, the footsteps didn't wait until morning hours. They began as soon as the sun went down. Upstairs, downstairs, kitchen, living room, walking openly now. No attempt to be quiet. I stood in the center of the living room, heart pounding, gripping my phone even though there was no signal. "Stop!" I said aloud. The footsteps paused. Then a voice answered. Calm, familiar, patient. Why? The hallway darkened, the way it had before, but this time the darkness spread outward. It filled the living room, swallowing the edges of furniture, pressing inward until the house felt smaller, tighter, like a box closing around me. It stepped forward, not from the shadows, out of them. It looked like me in the way a reflection does when the mirror is warped. Close enough to be convincing, wrong enough to be horrifying. "You don't belong out there anymore," it said gently. "You were tired. You wanted to stop." I told it to stay back. It smiled. I already did. The lights went out. I don't remember everything that happened next. There are gaps I can't fill no matter how hard I try. I remember pressure in my head, like something pressing against my thoughts. I remember memories slipping, small ones at first. Names, dates, places, then larger ones. Faces, reasons. I woke up on the couch just before dawn. The house was quiet. Normal. Too normal. I checked my phone. 3 days had passed. My bag was gone. My car was gone. In its place were keys on the table. Keys I recognized but didn't remember earning. There was a note beside them. "You're safe now. I'll handle the rest." I don't know how I got out of that house. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember packing or unlocking the door or walking away. All I know is that I woke up 2 days later in a motel, my name signed neatly on the guest register in handwriting I barely recognized. I quit the job, moved cities, changed routines. I avoided mirrors for a long time. Years later, out of curiosity, I searched for the house. It doesn't exist anymore. County records show it was occupied continuously until it was sold. No caretaker gaps, no vacancy. Someone with my name is listed as the long-term resident. Sometimes, late at night, I feel an odd sense of relief, like something else is carrying the weight of my life for me. And sometimes, when I'm alone and the room is quiet, I hear footsteps that match my own, walking calmly, confidently, at home. I've never told this story publicly before, mostly because I worked for a government agency when it happened, and partly because every time I try to explain it out loud, people assume I'm exaggerating. I'm not. I'm telling it now because I no longer work that job, and because the official explanation doesn't match what I saw. Not even close. For 9 years, I worked seasonal contracts for the National Park Service. My role wasn't glamorous. I wasn't a ranger in the sense most people imagine. I didn't lead tours or rescue lost hikers. I handled backcountry monitoring, checking remote trail conditions, inspecting closed areas, and documenting environmental changes in places the public rarely visited. I spent months at a time alone. That part never bothered me. In fact, solitude was a requirement for the assignment that changed everything. The area was a restricted section of wilderness that had been closed to visitors for over a decade. Officially, the closure was due to unstable terrain and environmental rehabilitation. Unofficially, no one liked talking about it. The locals had their own explanations. They always do. The place didn't have a name anymore. On maps, it was just an unmarked green expanse bordered by dotted lines and warning symbols. No trails, no campsites, no signage beyond a single locked gate miles away from where anyone would reasonably stop. My assignment was simple. Spend 10 days inside the restricted zone, document animal activity, check seismic sensors installed years earlier, and confirm that no unauthorized access had occurred. I was issued a satellite phone, emergency rations, and a reminder not to deviate from the assigned grid. The first 2 days were uneventful. The forest was dense but quiet. Too quiet. I noticed almost immediately that animal signs were scarce. No tracks, no scat, no bird song. Even insects seemed absent once I moved deeper into the zone. On the 3rd day, I found the first footprint. It was human, barefoot, perfectly formed in damp soil, as if the person had stepped down gently and lifted their foot straight back up. There were no others around it, just one. I photographed it, logged the coordinates, and moved on. By the 4th day, I started feeling watched. Not in a vague, paranoid way, in a directional way. Like awareness had weight, and it was pressing against my back no matter which direction I faced. The sensation intensified whenever I stopped moving. That night I camped near a dry creek bed. I woke just after midnight to the sound of footsteps. Not approaching, circling, slow, measured. Always staying just beyond the edge of my headlamp's beam. I called out, "Park Service, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then something answered. It wasn't a voice. It was my radio. Static cracked, then cleared, and someone spoke using my call sign. Perfectly, calmly, from somewhere inside the trees. When the radio spoke my call sign, my first thought was interference. That's the instinct you're trained into. Assume equipment failure before anything else. Radios glitch, signals bounce, static distorts voices. But this wasn't distorted. It was clear. Too clear. "Check in," the voice said. "We lost your signal." I stared at the radio in my hand. The
The satellite phone lay untouched beside my sleeping bag. The voice came again, same calm tone, same cadence. "Respond." I didn't. My training told me not to engage with unidentified transmissions in restricted zones. Instead, I logged the time, location, and signal anomaly, then powered the radio down. The forest reacted immediately. The footsteps resumed. Closer now. Branches shifted without wind. Leaves crunched under careful weight. Whatever was circling my camp was no longer content to stay unseen.
I don't tell this story to scare people. I tell it because what happened to my brother has been reduced to a statistic, and statistics don't carry fear. They don't carry guilt. They don't wake you up in the middle of the night wondering whether you missed the one moment you could have stopped something irreversible. My brother's name was Daniel. He was older than me by 4 years, the kind of person who never seemed anxious, never doubted himself. He worked as a civil engineer during the week and spent most weekends hiking, camping, or volunteering with local trail maintenance groups. The outdoors wasn't a hobby for him. It was where he felt functional. In late September of 2017, Daniel went missing. Officially, his case is listed as probable exposure following voluntary solo excursion. That phrasing still makes me angry. Daniel didn't make reckless decisions. He didn't disappear without preparation. He left notes. He checked weather forecasts. He followed rules. He respected terrain. And he never went anywhere without telling someone exactly where he'd be. That's why I knew something was wrong when he didn't answer his phone. He'd planned a solo overnight hike in a forested region about 3 hours north of where we lived. It wasn't remote in the way people imagine wilderness to be. There were marked trails, designated campsites, and occasional ranger patrols. Still, it was quiet enough that cell service dropped once you went deep enough. Daniel texted me when he reached the trailhead. "At the gate. Starting in a few minutes. Back tomorrow afternoon." That was the last message I ever received from him. The next morning passed without concern. He was often slow to check his phone when hiking. It wasn't until late afternoon, when the sun began to drop and his silence stretched past anything normal, that unease settled in. By midnight, I called the local ranger station. They told me not to panic. By the next morning, they started a search. I joined them that afternoon. The trail Daniel had chosen was a loop, roughly 8 miles, moderate elevation, nothing technical. Weather had been clear. Temperatures had dipped overnight but stayed well above freezing. There was no reason he shouldn't have walked back out. Search teams moved quickly. Too quickly. That was the first thing that felt wrong to me. How little surprise there was when they didn't find him. On the second day, they found his campsite. It was intact. Tent set up properly. Sleeping bag unzipped. Backpack leaning against a tree. Food untouched. Water bottle still full. His boots sat just outside the tent, toes pointing outward, as if he'd stepped out of them carefully. There were no signs of a struggle. No torn fabric. No blood. No animal tracks. Just absence. One of the volunteers commented that it looked like he'd planned to come right back. That night, a ranger pulled me aside, off the record. He asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Did your brother ever talk about hearing things when he was alone?" I asked what he meant. The ranger hesitated, then said quietly, "Voices." The next morning, they expanded the search area. That's when they found the trail Daniel hadn't planned to take. It didn't appear on any map. It wasn't marked. It didn't show up in satellite imagery. But it was there. A narrow path leading away from the loop trail, pressed into the forest floor as if it had been walked just enough to exist, and no more. And along its edge were footprints. Barefoot. Perfectly spaced. leading into the trees. The ranger who showed me the unmarked trail didn't put it in the report. He couldn't. Officially, it didn't exist. No coordinates, no designation, no reason for anyone to follow it. But it was worn into the ground just enough that you could see where someone had walked. Not often, not recently, but consistently, as if the forest allowed it to be there. They brought in tracking dogs that afternoon. The dogs followed Daniel's scent easily at first, from the campsite to the main trail to the point where the unmarked path branched off. That was where everything went wrong. Every dog reacted the same way. They stopped, whined, refused to move forward. One of the handlers tried to coax his dog ahead. The animal planted its feet and began shaking so violently the handler had to kneel down and hold it. The dog wouldn't look at the trail. It wouldn't even face it. By the end of the second day, the search shifted tone. Quiet conversations replaced radios. Rangers spoke in pairs, never alone. I noticed they avoided the unmarked trail entirely, choosing instead to circle the surrounding area, widening the search outward as if hoping Daniel had gone anywhere else. He hadn't. On the third morning, they found something that confirmed it. Daniel's jacket, folded neatly, placed on a fallen log about 50 yards down the unmarked path. No tears, no blood, no dirt. It was as clean as if it had been laundered. Inside the pocket was his phone, fully charged, still on. The last photo in the gallery had been taken at 3:12 a.m. It wasn't a selfie. It was a photo of the forest. Dark, flash on. Trees crowded close together, branches arching inward. At the center of the image, barely visible between the trunks, was a shape. Tall, thin, standing too still. The metadata showed Daniel had taken 7 identical photos in the span of less than a minute, all pointed in slightly different directions, as if he were turning in place, trying to see something that wouldn't stay put. That night, the rangers told me they were suspending the active search. I argued. I begged. I reminded them my brother was still out there. One of them, the same ranger who had asked about voices, finally spoke honestly. "We're not looking for a survivor anymore," he said, "and we don't want more people walking that trail." I asked him why. He hesitated, then said, "Because it answers." I stayed near the trailhead after they left. I don't know what I expected. Closure, maybe. A sign. Anything that felt like an ending. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. As dusk settled, I walked to the edge of the unmarked trail. I didn't step onto it. I just stood there and listened. At first, there was nothing. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Bare. Slow. Moving toward me from deeper in the trees. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might drown out everything else. A voice followed the steps. Daniel's voice. Soft. Careful. The same tone he used when he didn't want to scare me. "Hey," it said. "I got turned around. Can you help me find the way back?" I didn't answer. The footsteps stopped. The voice tried again. "I can hear you breathing." I backed away. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something worse than fear held me in place. Hope. The awful, dangerous kind. The voice shifted. It sounded frustrated now. "You're standing right there," it said. "Why won't you look at me?" That's when I understood. Whatever had taken my brother didn't chase people. It didn't drag them. It didn't force them. It waited until they stepped forward willingly. I left the forest that night. Daniel was officially declared dead 3 months later.
No remains were ever found. The unmarked trail doesn't appear in any public record. Rangers deny its existence. Satellite images show uninterrupted forest where it should be. But hikers still talk. They talk about a narrow path that isn't on the map, about hearing their names spoken gently from just beyond the trees, about the feeling that if they just took a few steps off the trail, someone would be there, waiting. I don't hike anymore. And if I ever hear my brother's voice again, no matter how close it sounds, I won't answer.